Hello and welcome to the webinar, Fire Season 2021, a learning opportunity. My name is Aaron Groth and I am your host and regional fire specialist for the coast with Oregon State University's Extension Fire Program. This webinar is part of a fall webinar series meant to help Oregonians learn from the 2021 fire season. Today, you will hear about fire response, preparation, planning, and post-fire assessment from both the Oregon Department of Forestry and the U.S. Forest Service. Overall, this webinar aims to address preparedness at 3 levels: individual, community, and the landscape. Coming up, we'll have a session on home hardening. Because you signed up for this webinar, you will receive information for those area-specific meetings, so stay tuned and feel free to visit us on the online webinar guide for updates. Logistics. Before we begin presentations, I have some webinar logistics that I'd like to quickly go over. This session is being recorded and all webinar recordings can be found on the FNR YouTube channel. We're also streaming live on the Extension Facebook page. There is the closed captioning feature, so hopefully we're all seeing that at the bottom of your screens. If you do not want to see the captioning, simply go to live transcript and hide subtitles. For the people tuning into the webinar on Zoom, your audio has been muted. If you are having audio troubles and are connected to your computer's audio, I suggest hanging up and dialing in with your phone. You can always post a question in the chat window if you are having technical difficulties. If you have a question on the information that is being presented, please type your question into the Q&A window. We have limited time, but we will do our best to answer your questions live. If you don't catch all the information presented, don't worry. We will provide all the resources and links mentioned during this webinar on our fire program website, and we'll follow up with an email just to make sure that you get the information. I think it's really important for us now to address trauma-informed care. The 2021 wildfires affected most Oregonians. Some of you had to evacuate your homes, some of you had to deal with weeks of unhealthy air quality due to wildfire smoke, and some of you lost everything. I know I speak for all of us in the fire team and in Extension that we are truly sorry for the impact wildfire has had on your lives. We acknowledge that the recovery is ongoing and is likely a stressful time with challenges that are affecting some of you in deeper ways than others. It is not our intention to undermine those challenges or the severity of your losses, but to acknowledge with respect and as much understanding as possible. Thank you for being on the line with us today and engaging in fire awareness and preparedness work. This work is important for everyone living in Oregon. It's also important to have a land acknowledgement. I want to acknowledge that all OSU Extension education happens on Indigenous homelands. We are working with OSU, our tribal liaisons, and also directly with tribal members to better understand and build meaningful relationships with tribal communities. And also going into the future, develop meaningful land acknowledgements. We really are excited to have our speakers, who I will introduce shortly. I wanted to go over with you the importance of this webinar as to glean lessons learned as well as best practices with regards to mitigation. Within the short term, we hope that you all learn about this year's fires and efforts to mitigate fires. We also want to stress that this perspective on the fire season is not completely negative. Over the medium term, we would like you all to discuss the success of proactive efforts on both public and private lands within their communities with regards to wildfire mitigation. And then in the long term, we hope to garner greater community support and effort to participate in wildfire mitigation. Okay, with all that said, let's get this webinar started. I would first like to introduce my colleagues. Ariel Cohen is co-host and also will be synthesizer. And Dan Stark, my forestry and natural resource colleague in Clatsop County, based in Seaside, is our moderator. Our first presenter is Ron Graham from the Oregon Department of Forestry. Ron is the Deputy Chief of Operations for the Fire Protection Division. A native of Michigan's Upper Peninsula, Ron began his career in wildland firefighting in 1988, working as a seasonal firefighter. He has spent his career as a park ranger, forest fire officer, district and assistant fire management officer, and an assistant state forester before joining ODF in 2015. After Ron, we will hear from our second presenter, Michelle Henry. Michelle is an engine captain for the Bly Ranger District of the Fremont-Wainema National Forest and had direct experience on the Bootleg fire this summer. She is currently detailed into the Assistant Fire Management Officer position and has been a U.S. Forest Service employee since 2004. She started her career in fire in 2009. Okay. We currently have over 300 people registered for this webinar and over 158 in attendance currently. We'll now move on to our poll questions. Okay, so our first poll question, it's multiple choice. How did you prepare for fire season this year? So for the 2021 fire season, how did you prepare? Okay, we'll give you a couple more moments to select. And again, you don't have to select a single item. If you took multiple steps to prepare for the fire season, you can select all that applied. Okay, do we have results of that poll, or should we wait a moment to give people another moment to have some more answers? Okay, so 30% of you made a list of emergency contacts. 56% of you cleared out defensible space. 12% installed fire safe building material. Under half of you prepared a 72-hour to-go bag. 51% of you watched and shared FireWare Fire Prepared. And 12% did not prepare for fire season this year. For those of you who did not prepare for fire season this year, I would highly encourage you to review the Spring FireWare Fire Prepared webinar series. Those are available both through Forestry and Natural Resources Extension YouTube channel, as well as online resource packets available through our fire program website. We really thank you for these responses. This will help in the design of our programming going forward. Okay, and now we have a second poll. And this poll is, what do you think is the #1 cause of fire starts in the last 10 years?
And Aaron, my apologies. Hey, y'all. This is Carrie Berger. I'm the fire program manager of the Extension Fire Program team. I'm the poll girl, and I messed up the polls, so I'm sorry. We don't have access to that second poll. So I don't know if you want to do spoiler alert and just let them know what the #1 cause is, but okay. I wasn't able to get that poll up. Apologies for that.
No problem, Carrie. Sorry about those technical difficulties, folks. So in terms of the #1 cause of fire starts in the last 10 years, the answer is debris pile burning. So it's really important that if you are undertaking debris pile burning, you are doing your due diligence and having specific efforts in place to mitigate against risks of escape debris pile burning. And with that, we have closed our poll discussion, and I will hand over to Ron Graham for his presentation. Thank you very much, Ron.
Yeah, good afternoon. Give me a second and I will get my screen shared and be up and running. All right, well, good afternoon. And as introduced, it's a pleasure for me to be here and join you all, serving as the Deputy Chief of the Operations for the Fire Protection Division for the Oregon Department of Forestry. I'm going to talk about the 2021 fire season, a little bit of what we saw throughout the season, and then some things that we're looking forward to advance fire protection in the state of Oregon. So the 2021 fire season was very different than 2020, obviously. And one of the main drivers was our weather factors that we were experiencing early on. By April, as you can see on the slide, much of the state was experiencing some level of drought, with the exception of just a little bit of far northeast Oregon that was hanging on to pretty normal conditions. This was somewhat reflected by a fire outside of Bend, the Bull Springs fire on March 30th, that required a pretty good response from multiple agencies, and it resulted in a lot of evacuations. And fortunately, with early season weather, a little shift in change in weather, plus the good coordinated response, folks were able to get that fire contained and keep it from becoming a large fire. But that's very early on in the time of year. And really, from March 30th on, for ODF at least, fire season kicked in and was really starting to become an active fire season. You can see the kind of the darkest circle area of the drought down towards Klamath and Lake County. That's where we started to see a lot of early fire activity and the effects of the drought on water supplies, et cetera. And in the bigger picture of things, by April, the drought was really starting to build in the entire West. The Southwest had extreme drought going on, and as far reaching back east, almost to Minnesota. And that impacts all of our firefighting resources nationally when fire season comes into full swing. And then, this progressed through fire season. We saw the heat dome, we saw a lot of high temperatures, we saw some wind events, lightning events, all of that coupled with, very little rainfall. And as typical, when we get into especially the months of July and August and the beginning of September, rainfall's at its minimum. We really don't see significant widespread wetting rains across the state. So, we're in it at that point in time. And that was the case this year. And by the time we hit September, all of Oregon's counties were in some drought status. And just refresh your mind back to that previous slide where Northeast Oregon was white and in no drought. And then you can see by September how quickly things advanced into extreme drought in that same area. And the drought was widespread. Most of the counties had some level of either drought declarations or pending local declarations. And also you can see, as mentioned too, when you look just below the state zoom, you can see the national picture, and the drought across the West really intensified and spread clearly all the way back through Minnesota, as mentioned before. So a lot of states were dealing with similar situations. So it wasn't just us, it was California, it was Washington, it was partners to the north, south, and it extended into the Canadian provinces too. And again, we partner with 5 Canadian provinces in our Northwest Forest Fire Compact for resource sharing. And to have the Canadian provinces experiencing the same type of weather patterns and drought as us and similar increases in fire activity, that once again limited resources that we could bring in from our Canadian partners, as we do typically in most years. And then just flash forward to, post fire season, the drought is still very much spread across the state, just a little bit of minor relief up in far northwest along the coast. But really, a lot of areas haven't seen substantial relief from the drought yet. We're starting to see the more fall, winter rainfall patterns, but it's going to take significant moisture, good winter snowpack. We don't need an early melt off of the snowpack coupled with warm, dry, windy spring conditions. It's going to take all of those factors to get us out of the current drought that we're in. And concerning to us as we plan for next year, of course, is when we start seeing multiple years of drought in this intensified condition, it really takes its toll on the fuels that we have both on the ground and the standing live fuels as their fuel moistures bottom out as well, and they become susceptible to burning. And again, same picture nationally, not a lot of relief yet across the West. And in some areas, the drought has spread even further east. So we'll be watching that closely as we progress through this off season and prepare for the 2022 fire season. This is pretty indicative of what we've seen over the last decades. It's pretty dramatic when you look at the fire occurrence and looking at large fires, typically fires that are over 100 acres in timber, 300 acres in grass. Going back to 1992, you can see the fire perimeters predominantly across the eastern part of the state in the drier fuels. And this was the case for the decade of 92 through 2001. There was significant fire activity, but for the most part, the western part of the state, west of the crest of the Cascades, the wet forest, as some have come to call it, had relatively less and few large fires on the landscape. Certainly some down in the Medford area, Grants Pass, far southwest Oregon, saw some large fire activity a little bit up through Douglas County as well. But as we move forward into the 2000s, you can see quite a shift of through 2011, the large fire perimeters that start to really show up on the west side of the state. You've got the Biscuit Fire down in the southwest, the B&B complex on the crest of the Cascade, much more fire activity in Douglas County as well. So you can see that spread already happening, some fires up near the Dalles, Hood River County, progression of the fires west. And of course, if you really zoomed into this down to a much closer scale, you'd see other large fires, albeit smaller in the number of acres on the west side of the state as well. So 2012 was really a major turning point in kind of the current fire intensity, fire activity model that we're in now. And you can see that clearly as we look at 2012 through 2021. 2012 really kicked off in the southeast part of the state with some incredibly large range fires. And since then, it's kind of spread to almost all corners of the state. Far northwest is the exception, but again, even in 2020, we saw fires out on the coast that were significant fires. And certainly now from the crest west is not immune from this kind of fire activity. And looking back from the fire activity that we saw in 2018 on, you can see a pretty continuous chain of large fires that have gone down the crest of the Cascades into the west. And this is indicative of what we see across ODF jurisdiction as well as our partners' jurisdiction. We're starting to see more and more acres burned, more intense fires, longer fire seasons, more need for resources, more than any of us individually have. So we're calling on our partners much more. And then just the situation across the West where we pull in other resources at times can add to the complexity of our fire season when we have resource shortages. With the added complexity of these large fires, we're calling on incident management teams much more. That too is taking its toll on all agencies as we continue to mobilize those teams more and more. And again, just focusing in now on this fire season, and Michelle will talk much more in regards to the Bootleg fire. That should be exciting to hear that. But you can see some of the activity again this year down the crest of the Cascades. We were very active, and this map also shows partnerships with our Office of State Fire Marshal when they send their structure protection teams in to take care of all the structure protection needs. And then you can also see our logo is where Oregon Department of Forestry incident management teams deployed. Oftentimes they go hand in hand. When we deploy an incident management team, the State Fire Marshal's office deploys a team under the Confederation Act and does structure protection, but also they do act independently when it's not ODF jurisdiction to deploy those same resources. And we did have 3 qualifying FEMA fire management assistant grant fires this year. And those fires have to meet certain criteria that present a major disaster threat to life and property. And then the state and its partnering resources, non-federal resources, get reimbursed for a certain amount of suppression costs. This is not public assistance funding like we saw in 2020 fire season with the federal disaster declaration and the presidential disaster declaration, where the public could apply for certain compensation and things due to the wildfires in 2020. So much less impact this year to communities than we saw last year. But nevertheless, an extreme fire season. You can see Klamath and Lake County, as I highlighted early on with the drought and the weather situation, were two of the busiest counties and saw some of the most acres burned. Very active fire season early and late for those two counties and for all of the resources down there. I'll share a little bit of numbers. These come from our partners at the Office of State Fire Marshal, and they deployed 57 of their task forces. They utilized the Emergency Management Assistance Compact to get 12 of those task forces through California, Utah, and Washington. This spanned across 121 Oregon fire agencies that participated, over 394 pieces of fire equipment, 821 personnel, and they responded in 11 counties. So an extremely busy year for our partners at OSFM, as was last year, of course. Unfortunately, there was one private contract firefighter that was killed this year. No civilian deaths, over 12,046 structures threatened. Significant number of structures threatened, but again, it didn't really compare with 2020. And we saw that in the number of FEMA qualifying fires that we had. 166 residents were still lost. And again, we're starting to see significant loss of residents and other outbuildings, and that's becoming more and more common for us as well. And just the Office of State Fire Marshal cost to date, over $21 million in cost for those resources alone. So again, significant cost to the state of Oregon. I will speak now directly to Oregon Department of Forestry protection. We protect 16 million acres across the state. And this year we've had 211 lightning fires that contributed to the largest amount of our acres burned, over 168,000. 930 human-caused fires for over 57,000 acres, for a total of 1,141 total fires on ODF protection, just over 226,000 acres. The Oregon Department of Forestry has a key performance measure to keep 98% of fires at 10 acres or less. This year, we're currently at 94%. We average 95 to 96 across most years. When we look at this fire season versus our 10-year average, lightning fires are just a little bit below the 10-year average, pretty on course. The number of acres burned due to lightning are up significantly. Human-caused fires are up significantly as well. That's quite a jump from the 10-year average of 718 human-caused fires. And the number of acres burned due to human-caused fires just slightly below the 10-year average. But in total number of fires is up this year, as well as our acres burned, which continues to trend upwards. Now, to break it down a little bit more in terms of those human-caused fires on ODF protection, this year, so the poll asked, what is the number one cause of fires over the last 10 years? Well, on ODF protection, the number one cause of fires is debris burning. This year, it was just edged out by equipment use. Equipment use is a very broad category, from power line equipment to vehicles to any kind of welding equipment, any human activity that involves equipment use at all is caught in equipment use. So it's a broad category, and it's not uncommon for us to see an increase in equipment caused fires, especially in drought years, especially in warm, dry, windy conditions where our fuel moistures are low, relative humidities are low. Bottom line is, at that point in time, a lot of the human activities that occur that in normal situations wouldn't support and start a fire, in the conditions that we saw this year, those activities start and support fires. So we do see that kind of increase. And a lot of times, with, again, people just wanting to get rid of burn piles early on and expecting that, they could burn their debris piles. from over the fall and winter in the spring when they normally do. Well, our springtime conditions were different this year. And even our live fuel moistures were drying out quickly. The 1,000-hour fuels that we monitor, big, heavy logs on the ground, those were at record lows. And so this year was extremely dry, and I think people are just unprepared and they're not expecting that. And people get used to conditions that are more normal. So there's a good breakdown of ODF specific fires, and that's just year to date. And as it is, we still continue to run fire response all calendar months of the year. So we'll see our numbers slightly increase as we go through the rest of the calendar year. This has brought on significant cost for the Oregon Department of Forestry. Prior to the 2012 fire season, we pretty much averaged about a $10 million fire season. The two lines depicted on this graph are our gross fire cost in blue dashed line and our net fire cost average in green. The difference between the two is our gross fire costs are all the money that we expend throughout the fire season. When we get reimbursed for other agencies that we support and put fires out on their lands, or we get FEMA suppression cost reimbursements, or the catastrophic wildfire firefighting expense insurance policy that the state of Oregon has, also plays into this. So this is again a growing trend of rising fire costs. We're built on a $10 million model, and you can see our fire costs are starting to exceed over $100 million, with 2020 being the most expensive fire season on record, and this year not too far behind, approaching $130 million in gross fire costs. I mentioned a catastrophic wildfire firefighting expense insurance policy. The state of Oregon has a $50 million deductible that leads to a $25 million insurance policy through Lloyd's of London. With our gross fire costs approaching $69 million this year, our net fire costs approaching $69 million this year, we're currently looking at a $19 million claim against our $25 million policy. We've had this insurance policy for the state in place since the 70s, and it's somewhat common every 5 years or so that we see a claim, and the policy parameters have adjusted over the years because of that. We did not have an insurance claim last year despite the cost, but we had much more FEMA recoveries with all of the fires that we had around the Labor Day fires. So this is going to be a challenging point for the state of Oregon and the Oregon Department of Forestry going forward with an insurance industry that continues to be hit very hard and very challenged. And we'll be restructuring our policy that's in effect from April 15th to April 15th each year. Fortunately, our state leadership made some significant investments for this fire season following the 2020 fire season. In January, the state's emergency board made investments into our severity resource programs, which is all about additional aircraft firefighting resources throughout the state that we exclusively use contract with and have for the fire season for ODF protection and our partners. This year, from the January e-board, we were granted an extra $5 million for severity resources that typically our funding doesn't kick in until July of the year. So from April, when we started bringing resources on through the end of June, we spent over $3 million on those additional resources, helicopters, single engine air tankers like pictured in the top frame, and a large air tanker as well. The state also made investments in personnel and brought us extra money to bring seasonal firefighters on sooner, and also utilized some limited duration positions in fire line management at the state office level throughout our field districts, as well as fire line leadership, and also fire mitigation to do fuels mitigation and fuels reduction projects on the ground across all ownership. So really significant investments through the January emergency board. And then in Senate Bill 762, significant investments going forward for those types of programs as well as our ODF 21-23 biennial budget. We saw some additional increases in firefighting capacity. That really is our path forward. We are currently implementing Senate Bill 762 in our 21-23 budget. We have a lot of new positions to fill and to hire that will bring us added capacity across all those areas of fire line leadership that we so badly need, and to bring our seasonal firefighters on each year going forward sooner, and hopefully keep them a little bit later as the fire seasons continue to lengthen and expand. All this with our partners. ODF was not the only agency that is benefiting from Senate Bill 762. Our partners at the Office of State Fire Marshal, Oregon Emergency Management, and others are also getting additional funding so that we can all build sustainable fire protection programs for the future. And this includes a lot of money towards mitigation, fuels reduction, prevention. Part of it for ODF is we're continuing to build out our wildfire camera detection system across the state. A significant amount of effort will be focused on the Eastern Oregon side, where we didn't have as many cameras as we do on the west. And then last but not least, all of these programs are hopefully intended to align with the Governor's Wildfire Advisory Council under the facilitation of the Governor's new Wildfire Program Director, former Chief of ODF Fire Protection, Doug Graff. So we really look forward to working with those groups to really continue to make sure that we can advance fire protection across the state of Oregon into the future. And with that, there's time for questions at the end. So I will end my presentation there and stop sharing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ron. Really appreciate your presentation. And now we will move on to Michelle Henry of U.S. Forest Service. Thank you, Ron.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. And Ron, you're going to be a tough act to follow here, sir. Let me get my screen shared real quick. Share sound. So like they said when they introduced me in the beginning of this, I am Michelle Henry, and I'm currently the Assistant Fire Management Officer for the Blind Ranger District. And I was a very, very active part of the Bootleg fire from start to finish. And I'm still working on the Bootleg every single day. Don't really have a bunch of numbers to throw at you guys. It's more of a firsthand, take on what the fire behavior was doing, our fuels, the fuels treatments that we did, and structures lost, defensible space. So I'm just going to go ahead and get started here. Like Ron said, we were in severe, extreme, exceptional drought, and this was for the day of July 6th when the Bootleg fire actually started. We had seen, multiple days, triple digit heats for the last, week prior to this fire starting. Our fuel moistures were incredibly low for all of our size classes. So even our larger, 1,000-hour fuels, which are that heavy dead and down we see out there in the woods, that stuff was bone dry and ready to burn. We were receiving high wind advisories, red flag warnings, fire weather watches, days leading up to the Bootleg starting. And then our fire weather forecast for that day is down in the lower left-hand corner. Excuse me. Says red flag warning in effect from 1400 to 2000 today for strong gusty winds with low RHs. So hot, dry, and windy. That's, a recipe for disaster in our minds. We are seeing, 95 degree temperatures, 10% RHs, and then the winds gusting up to 20 in the afternoon. So it was lining up to be a pretty extreme day, and we had known prior to, the start of this, our South Central Oregon Fire Management Partnership, which is what we call ourselves. It's all inclusive of Oregon Department of Forestry, U.S. Forest Service, Bureau of Land Management, the National Park Service, and the Fish and Wildlife Service. So we all work together. We're an all risk, everyone united. If we have a fire, it doesn't matter whose turf it is, we all respond. So I really enjoy that about South Central Oregon. Really awesome place to work. We had already seen multiple fires from the start of April when Ron was talking about all that drought beginning. We had seen 80-acre fires from debris piles already starting. So significant acreage had already been consumed. We had multiple, type 3 fires. If you guys are familiar with incident typing, we have a local type 3 team that mobilized 4 times prior to the Bootleg. And each one of those fires that they mobilized on was over 1,000 acres and did some pretty serious damage. Okay. So the initial tone out for the Bootleg fire started at 13:52 on July 6th. And we get this little text alert from our dispatch center over in Lakeview. And it gives us some brief information like where it's at, a landmark reference point, how big the report is, whose ownership roughly it is, and then what they're sending. So for this little smoke report here, this was 10 minutes after the fire was called in. My engine was called to pre-position, so we weren't sent to the fire, we were just moved closer to it so we could aid if they needed us. They sent 6 engines, 3 single engine air tankers, so those are the ones that drop retardant, and then a dozer to this incident for the initial tone out. And if you look in the lower right-hand corner, you can see my little timestamp on this. So 14:01 is when this photo was taken. 20 minutes later, this is what the column looked like. We were still sitting at the same location, and firefighters, we see fire, we get antsy. It is not our way to self-dispatch. So regardless, if we want to be there and we wanted to help, we have to wait until our dispatch center sends us there and we get the response. It's a matter of, safety and knowing where your resources are at all times. So within the 30 minutes of this fire being called in, the first resource arrived on scene. The Lakeview Interagency Fire Center received a size up of 10 plus acres, and it was running, torching, spotting, wind-driven runs going down slope. That kind of just tells you that this area was primed. It had minimal fuels treatments. The fuel loading was there. The stems per acre was incredibly high. It has been an area of concern for many years. And a friend of mine earlier in the springtime talked about how this was the year that Fuego was going to go up. And we kind of joked about it, but man, it absolutely did. And it caused a lot of devastation. So within that 20 minutes, my duty officer called and said, get moving. I'm going to call dispatch. You guys are going to this fire. So we left, and I was listening to, the TAC channel and the incident commander talking about how it was moving too fast for anybody to do any scouting out in front of it. They just local knowledge knew what roads we could get to and potentially try to stop it there or hang it up somewhere. But there was nowhere we could get, a safe anchor point. This fire was moving quick. With multiple fires going on in this area this time of year, we didn't have sufficient resources, so we were extremely short-staffed, and our initial attack resources pulled a 40+ hour shift. So just a frame of reference, this is a photo taken by one of our firefighters headed to the Bootleg from Bly. So this mountain back here, if you guys can see my mouse moving, this is what we call Fuego Mountain. And then if you look northeast, starting right in here, this mountain range right there is the Black Hills. So just remember that for the future slides. Very important, very crucial area where we've been in some solid project work, prescribed fire, fuels treatments, all that. So I'll get to that here shortly. This was the night of the initial attack. 2:36, I wouldn't say night, 2:36 in the morning, July 7th. We were still aggressively and actively trying to fight this fire and stop it somewhere. If you guys look at that picture, you can see all those firebrands coming off the trees. Those trees are anywhere from 40 to 100 feet tall, and we're still seeing that type of fire behavior at 3 o'clock in the morning. It was, excuse me, it was a mess. it brings back a lot of kind of anxiety for me, because I know a lot of people put a lot of effort and we were invested in this area, and we lost a lot of land, and it's pretty devastating. I can look out my front office window, 8 miles out, it's nothing but black. So pretty emotional fire. So with this picture, if you guys can just picture it, you're standing here, you're looking south, and if you head to your east, there's what, the Sycan River, and that's a boundary between the Chiloquin Ranger District and the Bly Ranger District where this fire burned onto. So those firebrands spotted across the river, but we had like the sense of relief that we were going to stop it. This fire was going to fall on its face because it was burning into our prescribed fire area that we had literally just burned in this spring. And the last, 10 years prior. We're in there every spring, every fall, putting fire on the ground, doing what we can to treat the fuels. It's pretty amazing area. So that previous slide was 2:30 in the morning. I don't have a timestamp for this one, but this is, I would say, around 7 o'clock in the morning. And if you guys would just kind of focus on the tree density and the fuel loading in there, I'm gonna go ahead and play this video. So once again, those trees are everywhere from 50 to 100 feet tall, and we're seeing that type of flame lengths and fire behavior 7 o'clock in the morning. We had no relief, no overnight humidities, no recoveries. The wind never died down. It was a battle from the start. Like Ron was saying earlier, that the exceptional drought that we were in had the surface fuels so dried out that they were volatile. They were ready to burn. Oh, sorry, my apologies. So this is where I'd like to bring focus in a little bit more on the prescribed fire side of things. Just down at the bottom of this photo is where it blew across the river. And this is our prescribed fire burn area. This is where we have done years and years of work implementing, logging operations. And then we go through and we burn the landing piles, and then we go in there and we write prescribed fire burn plans, and we implement those burn plans. And I've been a very active member in writing the West Badoo prescribed fire burn plan and implementing that as a prescribed burn boss type 2. So it makes me pretty proud to see this patch of green in there. Like, what we're doing is successful and it's important. This photo was actually taken by one of the tribal members, Mr. Steve Rondo, and these next couple slides have made it to the Washington office. Like, that's how important the work we're doing is. Another photo, just a different angle. It's very impressive to me, and this makes me very proud to be doing what I'm doing. Just a map reference of where that's at. This is what we call the 3462, and then the fire started over yonder. Okay, so we managed to spend the first 40 plus hours over on that side of the river coming into our West Badoo burn. This is leading into the 4th day of extended attack, and we had continually level 1 evacuations and dealing with the Oregon State Fire Marshal, which they were a huge asset and a great help to us. Got a lot of respect for those guys coming and helping us out. Oregon State Police, so they were the ones out there facilitating all of the evacuation notices. They evacuated the whole eastern side of Ivory Pine, which is this road right here. It's one of our double lane paved county roads that goes into just kind of a wild and urban interface, rural subdivision, homestead type area, and we call it the High Country Estates. Excuse me. I'll play the video before I start talking again, just to kind of paint you guys a picture of, once again, how extreme our fire behavior was and how significant, like, this event. So measuring from the road edge to the timber line, they had tried to do 100% prep and cut down every single reprod tree there was. And this is on state land, so it's pretty devastating to see all the really nice trees they were growing are now lost. This is about 150 feet to 200 feet of prep, and it danced right across that line and blew across the road and decided it was gonna, oh, excuse me, it was gonna take some homes with it. So while the Oregon State Fire Marshal and Oregon State Police were doing evacuation notices that morning, this was later that evening, and the column was, pushing eastbound, and the wind was coming out of the west, and we couldn't get out in front of it because fire behavior, 1, was too extreme. 2, it was too smoky. We couldn't see, 10 feet in front of us, and it was unsafe to engage. So we called in for some air support. Some heavy air tankers from San Bernardino came up, and they did 2, possibly 3 retardant drops, and said that they couldn't do it anymore because they could not see and it was unsafe for them. So that's totally understandable. But the really important take home on Ivory Pine and the high country estates was some people lost their homes, and that was inevitable. That wasn't their fault. It wasn't our fault. But a lot of homes were saved because they had, 1, defensible space. They had, they're fire wise and fire aware, and they're doing all those fuels reductions on their private lands within the urban interface. It doesn't matter if you live a mile out of town or 50 miles out of town. If you're a homeowner, you should be taking care of your land and trying to prevent your home from being lost in the event of a catastrophic wildfire. That's just my opinion, not fact. Let's see here. So this is a aerial view from one of our air attack ships, just kind of showing the impressiveness of that column throughout the duration of the bootleg. I can go on and on, day by day, break it down for you guys, but really I'm here to talk about prescribed fire and the effects of fuels treatments, and also bringing it into fuels treatments within, wildland urban interface and privately owned lands. Just for an interest piece, I've got a progression map of the bootleg fire. This thing ran anywhere from 3 to 5 miles a day, doubled in size some days, and the colors show you the daily progressions throughout July 7th through August 3rd. So this is a month of progression of that fire. And so the high country estates is right in here. And we lost another area called Sycan Estates up in here. Once again, it came down to the ones that had defensible space and had done fuels treatments and didn't live, under, wood piles and all that stuff. And it's extremely unfortunate when we're going out to the woods, patrol or do any project work, we're seeing the aftermath of people losing their homes, and it's devastating. So this picture was taken by a friend of mine at the Kingsley Air Force Base in Klamath Falls. This is well above 30,000 feet. And this is the column that made it all the way to the East Coast and smoked out Washington, D.C. So not saying I'm proud of that, but it is extremely impressive that, a fire all the way on the Oregon side of the states can make it all the way to the East Coast. I guess to round this out, my take-home messages, I've been talking about them, briefly here and there, is, defensible space is extremely crucial in preserving your land and your home. And especially if you guys are in that wildland urban interface, we call it the WUI. So if you hear that word thrown around, that's what that means. In our prescribed fire programs and our fuels treatments, he was talking about the smoke impacts, Ron was earlier, and something we all need to consider is that we are only allowed so much smoke intrusion and smoke put up in the air during the spring and the fall that they limit us on being able to actually go out there and do prescribed fire to where we can make our forest defendable. So that's still a battle. I don't think we're ever going to win it or get a thumbs up from smoke on being able to treat more acres annually, but definitely not going to stop doing what we're doing at the local levels. So I guess we'll have questions at the end of this, and thank you guys all very much for your time.
Great. Thank you, Michelle, so much for your presentation. I'm just going to give a quick wrap up. I know we're getting close on time here, but thankful for everyone for continuing to join us. So that was really great to hear from both Ron and Michelle, that we got, the larger picture view of what this year's fire season was like, and some of the lessons learned from it, and to hear from Michelle on more specifically what happened with the Bootleg fire, and a lot of her take-home messages really relating back to the basics about fire behavior, that maybe some of you are familiar with this fire behavior triangle, that all these three components are important, contributing to fire behavior, weather, topography, and fuel, but that we had this serious drought that played into the Bootleg fire this year. So we can't really control the weather so much, can't control topography, but we can make a difference with fuel loading and reducing some of those hazardous fuels. And also that relates back to another lesson for all of us on the importance of defensible space, given the conditions that are out there and what future fire seasons might be like. For homeowners, this is the work that they can do to reduce their risk around their properties and their homes. And then what Ron was mentioning earlier about some of the common causes of fire starts around our state, and that we just make sure when we're doing that important reduction of fuels, sometimes through doing pile burns, that we just make sure that those piles are completely out. And then also the safe use of equipments, following whatever kind of permits we might need to use them, and also making sure that we're aware of whatever fire season restrictions there are on equipment use in order to prevent human fire starts. And what Michelle was saying about the importance of prescribed fire and fuel treatments, how we see the Bootleg fire as a form of a case study, and that there's also been a lot of other research out there looking at how prescribed fire, and depending on the forest types or the ecosystem, can really make a difference, and certainly fuel treatments making an impact on reducing that wildfire risk. And lastly, Ron had mentioned this, that we're just going to be keeping an eye and ear to the updates coming out with the developments from the recently passed Senate Bill 762, and what that might mean for increasing capacity and getting more of these fuel treatments and prescribed fire on the ground, so that a difference can be made for future fire seasons. So for those who have joined us previously on these Wildfire Wednesdays, Fire Prepare webinars, we often like to wrap up with a call to action. And so if you're just starting out, I would encourage you to share these webinars with your community and discuss how wildfire risk reduction might look in your region, in your area, and maybe your neighborhood. And if you're further along and have already taken some actions to be fire prepared, I would encourage you to reach out to your local agencies, or find out if there's a collaborative group in your area different organizations that might be working on fire mitigation projects that are being planned or already occurring in your area, and see how you might be able to participate. So with that, I think we can now turn over to the question and answer session, which Dan, I'm not sure how much time we've got, but
we have a couple minutes, and our crew has been actively answering these questions. So if it's all right, I'd like to just kind of bring a couple of those forward, because some people may have similar questions. So if I can ask Michelle and Ron to turn their questions on here, I'll just have you read some of what you've answered for some folks in here. And just, I was curious about this too, Ron, excuse me. You, in your first slide, you mentioned the term miscellaneous there, and it was one of the highest kind of things there. And I think that answer is kind of important. And would you mind just sharing that with us?
Yeah, sure. The miscellaneous category, it is a kind of a big catch-all category. And those are typically fires that fire investigators could not determine the exact fire cause, or a lot of times it's fires that there's still an open investigation, so we can't publish what that exact fire cause is. Sometimes what happens is, as responders are going to a fire and they get on scene, they take immediate action to suppress and put out the fire. Unfortunately, at times, evidence is destroyed in that process. So investigators aren't able to find all the pieces, put things back together, and 100% determine a fire cause. We start with the basics. We determine, was there lightning activity in the area, and we either attribute it to lightning or rule out lightning. And then literally investigators get on their hands and knees and look over transects 1 foot by 1 foot and study everything on the ground to determine that cause. So it's a very tedious process. And you can imagine, with 1,141 fires for ODF, we do investigate all of our fires for cause.
Thank you so much for that follow-up, Ron. Really appreciate that. And there was one more recent for Michelle here. We have, and if you have your questions, please, this is your chance. We won't, we do have, space and a little bit of time here if you have a burning question while we're going through these. Michelle, someone asked, when you're talking about your management objective, when you're prescribed fire work, can you describe the management objectives for those?
Yeah, absolutely. And they all vary based on the geographic location we're doing these fuels treatments and prescribed fire in. But for the Black Hills specifically, it's previously owned tribal lands that we have purchased from them. And it's an area that we wanted to reduce the fuel loading and get the land out there back to its historical, fire sensitive, fire managed landscape. So all that undergrowth and heavy deadened down and stuff like that, we want to eliminate that, year by year to get it more back to a fire adapted ecosystem.
Great. Thank you so much for that, Michelle. I think this is a great question here too, and you folks can follow along these questions too. Some of these have been answered. So someone was curious about the small versus large aircraft deployment on fires. I think about that a lot too. Does Oregon even have large aircraft? It sounds like some maybe came from California, and Ron, you tackled that one. Would you mind highlighting what you said?
Sure. I'll speak only from the ODF perspective. Our partners, our federal partners, have a lot of aircraft they contract with as well. But the Oregon Department of Forestry, I mentioned in the presentation, our severity program, which was part of the Wildfire Protection Act passed in 2013, established funding and the contract mechanism for the department to attain privately contracted aircraft and other resources through exclusive use contracts, meaning we have that resource available to us for the duration of the summer under our control. And we employ various types of aircraft for those contracts. We have fixed wing detection planes that are out looking for fires. We have small helicopters that transport firefighters aerially to the fires to get them there quickly in remote places. We have larger aircraft helicopters that we use for bucket work, dropping water on the fires. And then as mentioned in the picture, the single engine air tankers, including 2 of the new Fireboss single engine air tankers that can actually land on the Columbia and scoop up water. And then we do also have a large air tanker. So one of what you typically, see on the news is a large air tanker under contract. And we move that around to the bases between Redmond and Medford and wherever we need to locate that throughout the state based on fire activity. As a fire manager, we always try to match the right tool for the right job. And that's very complex in terms of terrain, capability, other aircraft in the area, visibility with the smoke, as Michelle mentioned, and availability. Sometimes there's a lot of initial attack fire going on, and initial attacks are a priority. We try to get all those fires stopped before they get big. So unfortunately, despite the aircraft that we have under our control and all of our partners' aircraft, sometimes there's just not enough. And we can't, stop every fire before they get large.
Great, thank you. With that, it looks like we're going to be at just about at time here. So I wanted to hand it back over to our moderators here. Thank you so much for all of your questions. It looks like there weren't any that weren't answered here, but we would follow up with that in the future if we didn't get around to answering your questions. So thank you so much.
Hey, thank you all for joining with us. We have Wildfire Wednesdays, prioritizing your home hardening approach on November 17th. So look forward to seeing you all next week. Thank you all for your participation in this event, and really like to thank our panelists, Michelle and Ron. Really appreciate you joining us and providing your expertise. Hope everyone has a great day. Thank you.